Welcome to the Herpcore History podcast, presented to you by Little Shop of Horrors. Feel free to reach out to us on any of our social media platforms for any of your feeder needs. All right, let's go ahead and get into this episode. All right, today I'm joined by Quetzal Dwyer. How are you doing? Yes, sir. How are you doing?
I'm good.
Excellent. We were chit-chatting a little before we got started here. It's heating up. It's heating up here.
Yes, it is, but I'm happy to see that. We made it through the winter, had my facility with no losses or no disasters, so I'm happy about that. Happy it's spring, happy to see all the critters see that it's spring and are acting accordingly.
Yes, sir, yeah. It means we can start to get back out in the field here soon enough.
Yes, that too.
That I always look forward to. I've never been a fan of winter till you start breeding rodents, and then you're like, you know what? I kind of like this cold weather.
Yeah, right.
Well, excellent. So, where'd you grow up at?
I was born and raised in New York City. I lived there till I was about 26, and I moved to Costa Rica after that. And I was there for 25 years, and now I'm in Johnson City, Texas.
Okay. And then when did you start getting into reptiles?
Oh, I've been into it my whole life. I was into, I was just, I don't know, always fascinated with them. And, I would sometimes go upstate with my family, for like long weekends or whatever. And I would, catch garter snakes and stuff like that there. And, in the early 80s in New York, there was a lot of exotic animal stores where I was a fixture. So I got into it. Got into it that way.
Gotcha. Was that something your parents were supportive of, or what were their thoughts on it?
It kept me out of trouble. And, my dad liked to, he liked the woods and loved to go upstate. That was when he was at his happiest, when we would go upstate. But yeah, I never really wanted to do, reptiles professionally until until I'd say mid-20s, maybe when I was like 22, 23, I got a job. I got a job at a reptile zoo in Canary Islands, Spain. And I was over there for 6 months. And that was when I decided that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. I had to set up in a tropical climate and have people pay to look at my collection and let the climate do the work. And so then after that, slowly but surely, I put something together in Costa Rica.
To make that jump from going and traveling and overseas to start working at a reptile zoo, what made you do that? How did that opportunity come to fruition?
It's kind of a funny story. I was at an IHS reptile meeting in Seattle. Okay, and I was the only person there who was underage. I was like 20, I believe, at the time, and I was drinking and. They started giving me a hard time, and I ignored them. I mean, I'm talking about the event was at a hotel, and I ignored them, and I kept drinking. And then the people kept complaining, and then they said basically they're going to shut down the whole IHS if they catch me with another drink in my hand. And that would have been kind of embarrassing. And then so obviously I stopped drinking. No, I didn't stop drinking. I poured my beer into a Coke can or something like that. Then after that, this English guy came over to me and started talking to me, and he was like, "Yeah, can you believe these people over here? I was smoking a cigar the other day, and this woman said I was invading her airspace." And I just laughed at her, and I was like, "Yeah." Then we started talking, and we became friends. And I saw him several years later at another IHS. I believe it was in either Miami or New Orleans. I can't remember which. And I asked him, half jokingly, the lease on my apartment was about up. So I was like, you need any help? I'd be happy to come over there and work for you. And he said, yeah, 3 months. 3 months I could use somebody. And then that was actually when the lease on my apartment was up. And so I went over there. Worked for him, learned Spanish. Decided that's what I want to do with the rest of my life.
Oh, interesting. And so obviously you had an interest early on with reptiles, getting to go upstate and being exposed to the different pet shops that were in the area. What were some of the early animals you were keeping?
I'd say in the beginning, it was mostly rat snakes. And I mean, I had a little bit of everything. I kept a lot of rat snakes in the beginning, and then I got more into lizards. And then when I had my own place in New York, or I had a place with roommates, as soon as I moved out of my folks' place, I had mostly just monitor lizards because it's like, in an apartment, you're kind of obligated to specialize in what you like the most. But I had other stuff, but I was, my heart was with, in the early '90s was late '80s was mostly monitor lizards.
Interesting. And what kind of species were you keeping at that time? And when did you start getting interested in breeding?
Oh, well, I was always interested in breeding. But I had bred peach throats. I bred the Argus monitors, the Panoptes horni, the New Guinea Goulds. I had mangroves. What else did I have? I had Scalaris. I had Timors. I had Dorianus. And yeah, at that point, what else did I have? I had Timon lepida, and yeah, that was that's all. That's all I can remember from that phase in the late '90s in that apartment that I lived in Queens.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, still quite an extensive collection to keep in an apartment and to do at a high level. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, I had a construction background, so I built like nice cages for them, and everything was plumbed to make it easy, to make it easier for maintenance. And it was kind of funny. It got to a point when like friends of mine they'd take their dates to my apartment, as opposed to take them to the zoo or whatever, which was all well and good, but I might as well make some money doing it. Doing
Yes.
that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and so where were you getting knowledge from early on in that time frame? Was it mentors or was it mainly
Yeah, there
books?
was a lot of mentors and a lot of books. I mean, I'm still a book nerd. My my house is, I'm working expanding my house right now, and I've just got boxes and boxes of books that I that are in the way as I'm working. But yeah, books and talking to people and mentors, I'd
Yes,
say.
sir. Very cool. Who are some of those mentors? Do any, not that any are less than any others, but do any stand out to you as kind of a real shift in your thought process and keeping?
Yeah, well, okay. One who really stands out was Philippe de Vaugelet. 'Cause he used to have a reptile store in New York. There was a couple of partners that was called Small Worlds, and you could like really see the love that went into it. All of his enclosures were planted up, and everything had a lot of room, and it was a lot different than seeing something in just a fish tank with a branch or two. Yeah, and yeah, that was very. I still talk to him fairly frequently.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, how interesting to have mentors like that around you to kind of to learn from and get that experience.
Yeah,
And then
there was another guy named Aldo Passara who had a store called Fang and Claw, which was around the corner from my junior high school. He has since passed on. He has since passed away.
gotcha. Yes, sir. Yeah. Interesting. Well, again, just to have all of that information there and those like-minded, was it something that was there ever a point where you kind of walked into, was it, an IHS meeting or maybe a smaller, like, state herpetal club or snake show where it was like, oh, these are my people. This is what it is. And kind of, it sounds like there was a path here that started opening up your mind to these different ideas. Was there any times kind of before that were those moments for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was always drawn to it. I mean, I've still got the same passion that I always had. I mean, I was a little worried that if I were to go professional with it, with the interest with reptiles, I would become desensitized, or the passion would burn out. But that's not what happened. I'm still as into it as I always was.
Yes, sir. Yeah, very cool. That is the cool part about this hobby, right? Is the people that have been in it for a long time and really committed to it. That's it's very admirable, and it's very hard to do when you really think about it. And the outliers that do it, it's really a testament to kind of who they are.
Right. But I mean, the thing is that's funny about it is like I can't ever picture myself doing anything else because it would be a step down.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, how great is that to be in a position where you're doing something that you love, that you're passionate about? That is something that's very rare. It's like when you run into the person that doesn't have a hobby, and you're like, "What? You don't,
Oh yeah,
you don't
yeah,
have
I
a
feel
hobby
bad
at
for
all?"
people like that.
I mean, but what a weird concept. I remember the first time someone brought that up to me, and I'd never thought about it. The idea of not having a hobby, and then just very peculiar. There's people who are just floating around, just
Yeah,
like that.
yeah, it's a weird one. But
Yeah.
that's where you really shine. Work is not work when you're doing what you love. And it's like it's hard for me especially to get into something that I'm not into.
Yes, sir. Yeah. No.
So
Hundred
it's like,
percent.
yeah.
Yeah. No, and so early on there, what were some of, obviously you were going upstate, getting to flip rocks and do all that. When were some of your first field trips out of state maybe? And when was that?
Let's see. I went to Florida with my family one time, uh, which was fun. I caught some stuff there. There was another time we went to Arizona and I caught a bull snake, and they wouldn't. I tried to walk through the X-ray with it, and the security took it away from me, and I threw a big tantrum, and I was like fighting with the security guards, and I think I bit one of them too when I was like 10 or something like that. And I actually, several years ago, many years, like, I was joking with that with my mom, and I was like, "Yeah, you got to admit that's kind of funny," and she was like, "No, that was embarrassing." So like she was still embarrassed after after however many decades.
I mean, could you imagine? Could you
Uh,
imagine walking through with your kid, and did they know you had the snake on you, or was that also a surprise to them?
oh no, that was my parents knew,
Oh,
but
okay.
I don't.
But then
But
still, your
this was
child's
long.
mauling the guard. You're going,
Yeah,
what
yeah. I didn't
the
want to give up. I
hell?
didn't want to give up the snakes, but whatever. It just goes to show how passionate about it I was.
You're committed. You are committed. I can say I've never done that. So yes,
Yeah.
sir. Well, that's so interesting. And so getting that opportunity to travel overseas again and work at that facility, and you brought up the idea of getting nature to maintain the animals for you. What were some of the lessons that you learned there, and when did your thought process in keeping start to kind of shift?
Um. Well, basically, some of the things that I learned was that basically, sunlight is everything with the lizards. Um. And it's a lot of with a lot of lizards. Canary Islands was subtropical. It's like on the same latitude as Florida, if I'm not wrong, but it wasn't. It did get coldish in the winter. So yeah, I think subtropical Mediterranean. But one of the things I learned was like it didn't matter, if it got cold, as long as stuff could get underground, as long as the lizards could get underground, they were fine. So that
Yes.
wasn't anything to worry about.
Yeah. And kind of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but especially early on, the idea of getting these animals cold was pretty alien. Was that something that you were kind of grew up being taught, or very quickly did you know that wasn't necessarily the case?
No, I mean, I did when I was real young. I did what everyone else did, um, and but I would notice like subtle differences with the climate. Like even in New York, it's like the peach throat monitors. Those would always breed in the hottest days of summer. That was what really got them going. But yeah, it's also from living in Costa Rica as well. It's like there's no place in the world where it's always 85 degrees. There's always fluctuations. And even in places, I've been shivering in Panama at sea level, during a storm with my teeth chattering and everything. I've been cold in Suriname as well at sea level early in the morning. I remember it being brisk, and Costa Rica as well. It's where I lived. It was only like 300 meters, like 1,000 feet elevation. But yeah, it got down to 68 degrees in the early mornings.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. So again, just kind of learning from nature there, right? And
Yeah,
being willing to, feel and kind of think about, what these animals are experiencing.
yeah.
Interesting. Yes, sir. Yeah. And what was your jump to Costa Rica? What happened in between that when you finally went, hey, this is where,
Well,
what was your,
that was basically after I had been in Canary Islands. I went back to New York because it was like, I'm the type of person I like to do things my way. I like to be the boss. Yeah, I could have stayed there indefinitely, but I like to do my own thing. I don't like to work for other people. And I had kind of an in with Costa Rica because I'd grown up with some guys down there who were from down there, and so we got to like leapfrog the whole tourist hustle type of deal. And I made some very important friends down there as well, who were, I mean, important like guys who really believed in the project and went out of their way to help me, so I didn't get scammed or screwed. Which used to happen a lot in that time period. I'm not sure how much it happens now, um, but yes, I get to leapfrog all of that. And the idea there was to, buy the property and then take like a year to build my own house. Um, so I would make the mistakes I would make would be on the house, because a house is a lot less important than a zoo, to me at least. And that way I could study the climate and see where the rain fell and where the sun hit and et cetera, and figure all that into my plans.
yes, sir. Yeah. How interesting. How interesting. And that's, not to skip ahead, and I want to stay on track of where we're at, but I've got to go through and walk through your facility now in Johnson City, Reptilandia, and what a cool facility, and what a
Oh, thank you.
what just a revolutionary kind of way to keep for the average person walking through. I think it's so eye opening to understand what can be done, and the different ways of keeping, that I think that is so invaluable for the average person walking through, that surpasses many zoos. And I think that if you are tapped into reptiles and interested in them, that you walk into somewhere like that, and if your brain isn't turning a million miles an hour going, okay, there's a different way to do this, that you're missing the whole experience there. Just such an interesting way. And so from the Canary Islands, as you were there and you were working, and was this something that you were planning out that you wanted to do, or was it, you got to the point where you're like, okay, it's time for me to make this jump. How do I do this? And then you facilitated it?
Yeah, basically. That's the latter is how it happened.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Mm.
And so what were some of, I mean, obviously we're learning so much at that time. What are some of the stories from your time in the Canary Islands, and what was that like for you?
Well, basically, I was a keeper slash maintenance man. When the boss figured out that I knew how to do like plumbing and electric and stuff like that. He had me doing a lot of that. But yeah, I'd say basically it was just watching. The best thing that came out of that was just seeing what a difference outdoors meant. Because in like New York, you couldn't really do that, especially not in the city. I mean, I would do stuff like I'd have cages like it went out the window and stuff like that, so stuff could get some light, some sunlight. But there's no comparison to doing it fully outdoors. I mean, in Johnson City now, my place in Costa Rica, a lot of that was most of that actually was outdoors. And I had the lizards were in outdoor pens. And it had running water going through it, and we're just in pens with running water. I took water out of a stream, and it came to a tank, and then I had hoses coming out of the tank, which went to each cage, and they all had fish and plants in it. So that was the maintenance was pretty low on that type of stuff. And then I had a building where I had snakes and smaller lizards that was open on the sides, but it had a roof on it, and it had a roof system that you could crank the roofs open with a boat winch. So you could regulate the amount of water that they got and the amount of sun that they got, because when it's there in a place like Costa Rica, it rains. It rains like you wouldn't believe, and that's no good for the animals if they're getting too much of it. You get a lot of every fall, which was the heavy rainy season there. We would always lose a few animals from skin and skin fungus. Typically the colubrid snakes were the most sensitive, and then came the vipers, and boas and pythons were the last ones to have skin problems, with a very interesting exception. I did breed Boland's pythons down there, and I had those in an indoor-outdoor cage, and I did lose some of the babies from skin infections, which I thought was surprising, because normally pythons, you wouldn't have any trouble with it, but it's like, that's a cold-adapted python, and so their skin is specially designed to warm up very quickly. And I did talk to a Australian friend of mine, and I asked him if diamond pythons, which is another cold-adapted python, if those were quicker to have skin infections, to contract skin infections than other pythons, and he said yes. So everything has a price,
Yes,
to
sir,
have. But that was a hard lesson in that case.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, what an interesting, again, just getting into being fully engulfed in it and thinking about it, where everything correlates back to the thing you're doing, and it allows you to make those little jumps and skips and knowledge to try to figure something out. But without that knowledge, you wouldn't do that, right? So that makes sense to ask questions, about a species that's more commonly captively kept, and then work backwards from that, where there's going to be some similarities.
I'm forever asking questions. There's, there's always something, there's always a lot to be learned.
Yes.
With reptiles. And it's whenever I have young kids come in my place with their parents, I've got a little speech that I hit the kids and the parents with at the same time, which is basically, kids stay with this interest, it'll take you places, and parents support this interest because there's a lot of fringe benefits as well. You learn about nutrition, you learn about genetics, you learn about medicine, you learn about geography. You get to meet people from all different walks of life. So, you'll find yourself getting free legal advice because a lawyer. You'll find yourself getting getting PBA cards because cops. You'll find yourself getting having more job opportunities because businessmen who are older than you.
Yes,
which is the truth.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, networking's important no matter what you do it, and the common love of reptiles there leads to a very interesting network where it's all types in the hobby that you run into.
Yeah,
I've been trying to make an electrician friend for a long time, but it's like a hot chick at a bar. They know why you want to be their friend. You're like, damn it.
Right. Well, okay, so I guess I shouldn't tell you I'm an electrician.
Oh, well, hey, buddy.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no. We're just wiring up the extension on the house this afternoon.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but really, though, what a valuable skill to know. And I think, again, it's so interesting talking to so many different facets of people within the hobby, from, the person that's solely interested in field herping to the person that, it's not a hobby, it's a business, to the, the zookeeper, and all these people in between, but the different skills that you grow around your particular interest in the hobby, right? And it's so unique where for someone like yourself that came into it and you go, not early on, but in your fundamental time of keeping, you go, this is what I want to do ultimately. Well, then you start to gather those skills, which is running a business, keeping a facility, expand. How do you do that? Of course, doing it yourself is going to be easier and cheaper, not easier, but cheaper. And so as an entrepreneurial young man, well, I got to learn how to do these things.
Right. But I mean, it's all connected. It's like,
yes,
I don't know, people who keep stuff, who have no interest in getting into the field, that doesn't make sense to me. Because I mean, to understand an animal, you should, or if you're serious, you should know something about where it lives. And it's like there's a lot of stuff that's not it's not common sense. Like, for example, like a banded gecko, it's a desert lizard, but they live in a moist microhabitat. Or bushmasters are jungle snakes, but they live in a dry microhabitat. They live in dry holes. So it's like, you'll learn. It's basically it's to your advantage to get in the field if you're keeping stuff. I mean, I
100%.
personally, I love the field. I spent a lot of my life in the field, and that's one of the places where I'm happiest when I'm out looking for stuff.
Out in the field and getting to experience that is so invaluable. And again, if you're into it, the amount of data you're going to be picking up from what's going on, especially, for me, looking for a target species, which is a species that I keep also, the lessons that I've learned through that have been invaluable.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's exactly. And there's always a lot of surprises as well.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and what are some of those stories from the field? I mean, obviously you have a passion for it. What were your fundamental first trips, and then middle? What was that like for you? A whole kind of
all right. Well, I've done, I've been in, probably about 50 countries in my life, so I wouldn't know where to begin. But something that comes to mind is that I was in New Caledonia. In the field at night, and I remember hearing what sounded like, imagine like shaking a bag of marbles in a bag, and I'm like, what the hell's that? And so I follow the sound, and then I get right to the tree where it's coming from, and the sound doesn't stop, which I thought was odd as well, because if it was like I thought it was like some type of insect making a weird noise, and it would have got startled as I got close. And then when I looked up, it was a giant gecko, a Rhacodactylus leachianus, trying to eat a katydid that was huge, about half the size of the gecko itself, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah. Well, those things out in the field that you get to see and you get to experience, how cool are they? I've got to see blacktails mating in the wild. That was very cool. I've got to see lepidus, even animals eating. What a cool thing to be at the right time in the right moment and to get to experience that, which is just everyday life for that animal. But right, you plan a trip out how far in advance, and you're there at that moment, at that time, and over time, the information that you gathered to make a decision on where you're going to be, and you're there to experience that, and those sounds that you don't expect, where you go, I've heard about everything, but I don't know what that is. Right, I'm going to check this out.
But there's a lot of surprises too. It's like, let's see, something else that was a nice one, an interesting field experience is a friend of mine and I got access to a cement plant in Guatemala. Where they're into like doing conservation work, and the Guatemalan beaded lizards there, the Heloderma charlesbourgeri, live on the grounds, and the type of the soil type there is it's like a really kind of like a soft, like soapstone, right? And so there are these cliffs that are have like kind of really soft rock in them, and there's a type of bird called a motmot. It's like a kingfisher, and those dig into the soft rock, or it's kind of like half rock, half sand. I think it's soapstone, and that's where they make their nests. And you can see tracks like where the beaded lizards have dug into the caves to eat the birds' eggs. And we got to catch one of those beaded lizards in one of those holes.
Wow.
But, you wouldn't expect a beaded lizard to be, 12 feet up, on a cliff face.
How interesting is that?
Yeah, but that's where their food is, so.
Yeah, yeah. And I wonder if they're laying their eggs in there as well.
The beadeds, I don't think so, because it was like, I always like to talk to locals about that, and they said that there was the area where they always saw babies was somewhat close to like a little stream.
Gotcha.
And
But it
something
wouldn't
else
make.
that they told us that was interesting is they said there's a certain time of year. I can't remember exactly which time of year, but all the lizards are all moving in a certain direction.
Interesting. Yeah, and those are those things you experience in the field where you think, what is going on here? Like, for me, it took me years to find my first Pictogaster. I think they all got rolled into one now, but copperhead basically.
Yeah.
And out in West Texas, and then I started finding all of them. And there was this one cut that we would go to where you would watch them down at the bottom, and they would come up the side of this like rock wall, and they would pop up through a crack, and it would just. I mean, we saw 20 in a night just coming up. You'd see them at the bottom, and then you'd do your lap, come back, and then you'd see them on the little dirt road. And you'd do your lap, come back, and you'd see them on the cut, and they were all following that same path.
Oh wow!
And it's like, what's going on in that animal's mind? Why are all of those animals? I understand scent trails. I get that. Maybe a female crawled through originally, and maybe these are all males I'm seeing. But at the extent of the animals, and then what was very interesting is you would see other species following that same path, like the exact same
Right,
path.
because I mean, it's like what we don't get is like, especially snakes, but the reptiles as well, like live in a world of smell.
Yes, sir,
So it's like one of the ways I would acclimate wild snakes in Costa Rica would be like, for example, a bushmaster. If I get a wild bushmaster, I'd put it in a cage where I already had one, so it's a familiar smell, and that would usually get them to calm down and start feeding faster. But there's a documented case of a Bengal monitor that escaped in Florida from one of the heroes of monitor lizard biology, Walter Offenberg, escaped from his facility. Like during a hurricane or something like that, a tree fell on the cage, and somebody found it, several miles away in a hollow tree. And then several years later, he had another one escape. And where was it found? In the same hollow tree.
Interesting.
And so it had the smell of a monitor in it, maybe. And
man, when you think about that, if it's years later and just
the
smell
that's the
dissipating,
thing that's what I would think. But maybe there was another type of sign that it left that we're blind to.
Yeah. Man, but those are those things, right? When you're out in the field and you're there with your buddy or whoever that has that similar interest, where it's just hours of conversation, and over time they go and repeat, and you're just talking about the same thing over and over. Why do they do this? Why do they move this way? Why is that happening?
Right, and there's so much more to it than we know. I mean, I remember was a study done in Kazakhstan on desert monitors,
Yes,
in the 90s, and I'm surprised this is fascinating, but I'm surprised it hasn't got more attention. But it's like they have a language in the type of track that they use, that they leave. It's like if a male is passing through another male's territory, he'll leave a certain track that says he doesn't want any trouble. And he'll leave a different track if he wants to challenge the male, and a female who's receptive will leave a certain type of track, and a female who's non-receptive will leave a certain type of track. It's fascinating stuff, but I mean, it's to me that's the best part of it. It's just there's so much more to these guys than we give them credit for.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's so interesting. Especially when you think about reptiles and how reptiles are looked at in a kind of scientific way. They're not assumed to have much intelligence at all, and to think about a language of some sort, right? Maybe that isn't the right term, but
No, it's the right term. I mean, I can't think of another term to use.
Yes, sir. Well, yeah, I guess that's right. But that they're doing that, how does that come to fruition? And then also too, figuring it out, the individual that went, hey, this looks different. That's, it's very, I'd be interested if, in follow up, send me that paper. I'd be interested in.
Yeah. I don't have the paper itself. I have reference. Actually, I can send you the reference. I'm I'm looking at my bookshelf right now. I see the book where I have the book right in front of me where it's referred to.
Yeah, no
It
rush on
was,
that. I mean, side note completely, but just again, just getting you're right. You just start thinking where you go.
no, but
Huh,
yeah,
okay.
I'd like to do it before I forget. You know.
Well, it's just so interesting. I mean, and what does that apply to in just our overall? And that's, you know, yeah, just my main interest and the thing that really, fires my passion is Alterna, gray-banded king snakes, and really a focus on West Texas, and just the hours of thought
No,
of going.
maybe next time I go out there, I'll go with you because I've only been out there once, and we went too early in the year, so we got to see all the diurnal stuff, but nothing nocturnal.
Yeah. Well, let me know. I start my own business here, and I don't get to do as many trips as I like to, but if you ever want to run out for a rocket run or something, I will let you know, and you're more than happy to ride along.
All right, yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, sir. Yeah. No, West Texas is such a cool spot. And what was your first trip out there? And you're saying you were at the wrong time, but what was that like?
Let's see. I went out there with an Australian friend of mine, and we met up with a guy you probably know, Robert Edwards.
Okay, yes, sir. The name's familiar. Yes, sir.
Yeah, he knows the area pretty well. And we saw coach whips and patch nose and bull snakes and hognose snakes. A lot of the diurnal stuff. We've and in atrox. But we didn't see any transpecos or any alterna or bears, rat snakes, or any of that type of stuff.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, we have a better chance of finding an alterna than we do at Baird's because I've only found one Baird's, but I have found 7 alterna. So I'll take that. You know.
Yeah, it's. Did you find the alternas you found? Were those on the cuts or on the road?
Well, mainly on the cuts. My main interest is walking cuts. That's what I'm into, and that's what it is. But I have found one on the road walking on cuts, like where I was walking cuts and this damn snake was crawling down the road. I was like, what the
Right.
hell? But I don't mind explaining to you my thought process behind what I do,
Yeah,
and why I
those
do
are
it in the
beautiful
future. For
snakes.
sure.
I'd love to find one of those in the field.
It's amazing. I mean, that feeling of just, I mean, happy dance, screaming like a little kid, jumping around. It's awesome. It's awesome. What were some of those species for you that were difficult for you to find? Where when you finally found them, it was like, holy crap! Finally made
Uh,
it happen.
let's see, like working hard for something, or just like being, like a dream species to find in the field.
Well, I think it could be both. I mean,
All
if
right,
two species or two times speak out to you, what are those?
all right. Well, the dream species was I remember like when I was a little kid, I remember hearing from remember this old reptile dealer named Terry Lilly. You remember him
No, sir. No,
from
sir.
California? Anyway, he told me about that there was a giant skink in New Caledonia that was very poorly known. Um, and then years and years later, I was at one of the IHSs and I was talking to Aaron Bauer, who's a big the authority on New Caledonian herpetofauna, herpetology. And I asked him about the skink. I was like, you ever heard of a giant skink there? And he was like, yes, he gave me the species Phoboscincus bocourti. And he said, it hadn't been collected in, a couple hundred years or whatever since the holotype. And he said that he did see one, but he couldn't catch it. So when I was over there, man, like, I don't know, 30 plus years after I had first learned of its existence, I was walking on a trail and I saw one in a tree and it was, oh my God. And, we caught it and took a bunch of pictures of it and let it go. But it's a really interesting skink. It's like the same niche that a monitor lizard would fill. It looks like a lizard eater. Nobody knows enough about them to really know because, like a lot of lizard eating lizards have long necks, for, I don't know, for killing them or whatever.
Yeah.
And, So it feels it, and they get pretty big. I mean, I think I'm not sure what the maximum length is, but I would say this was I don't know, 2.5 feet, as big around as a silver dollar, but not like
Wow.
not like a stocky big. It was like it was built like a monitor.
Yeah. Wow. How weird.
Yeah, that was an exciting in the field, exciting one to find in the field. It's
Yeah, to set
finding,
that memory, you know what I mean? To have
yeah,
that kind of bounce around in your mind. I'm sure when you were flying over there thinking about it, you're thinking about the things you could see, and that's a memory that pops up.
yeah, and then
Yeah.
just thinking like, okay, that would be nice to see, but it's probably not realistic. But that was a good one, and finding stuff that hasn't been reported in a certain country that's always exciting. There was this snake that had never been reported in Costa Rica. It's one of the snail eaters. It's Tropidodipsis sartori. That I was the first one to document that in Costa Rica, which was exciting. It was kind of funny but that was actually just dumb luck. It was in Santa Rosa National Park, which has been crawling with biologists for decades and decades, and it was just crossing the road. It wasn't any special special talent or skill on my part.
Right place, right time, and
Yeah,
the
right place, right
knowledge,
time.
and
Yeah,
the knowledge to know. You know what I mean? When you think
the
about
knowledge
it,
to know that it's something different. So
yes, yes. How cool is that?
yeah,
Again, just
that was
what
a
are
good
the
one.
what are the chances when you think of where you began as a young man in New York, and then to be right, to make the decisions, to be there, to have the knowledge in it, and to be there at that time when you really expand and really think about it from a beginning of your existence chance. How crazy is
Yeah,
that?
no, it's true. I remember like seeing pictures of stuff like caiman lizards in books when I was younger, and just like wow, I want to. How cool is that? And then
Yes.
then get to a point when you breed several generations of them.
Well, how interesting is that, to be there and be able to capitalize on that?
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. The way life has worked out for me.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, by no accident, right? It was hard work
Oh
and
yeah, there was hard
dedication,
work, and
decisions to do it.
there was more than a couple of moments when I was like, "What am I crazy? What am I doing?" Um, and not to mention everyone else. A lot of the Monday quarterbacks out there have something to say. Like, oh,
Yes.
you'll never do this, you'll never do that. It's like, all right.
Well, it's so interesting. I mean, and two, I mean, it's so interesting talking to the layman that isn't engulfed in the hobby and kind of what it is, and you talk about your business plans or your ideas or whatever it is, and well, a buddy of mine I was talking to a while ago said, I was just telling him something about somebody, and he said, "Man, you can really do anything." And
You
like, right,
can.
this guy,
It's true.
this guy, he's a doctor off doing his own thing. He's not thinking about keeping reptiles, anything like that. And just the idea of it, it's like, oh, huh. But that's obscure to most people. There's people,
Yeah.
again, like what we were talking about, there's people out there that don't have a hobby.
Yeah, so they don't relate to it. It doesn't make sense to them. But I could never live without a hobby because, like I said before, that's where you're really going to shine.
Yes,
And
sir.
it's
Yeah.
like, any idiot can make money, but the smart guy is the one who makes money doing what they like.
Yeah. Well, and most people will never experience that. That's the reality of it.
Yeah,
It's very
it's
interesting.
sad.
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, excellent. And so what was, anything that during your time of running your facility in Costa Rica, what was that like once it ultimately got going? Any
Oh,
interesting stories from
oh,
that?
I was shit. I wouldn't even know where to begin. There's so many interesting stories. It wasn't even funny. Um, as far as like husbandry stories, I'll tell you an interesting one. There's this large aquatic lizard from South America called Crocodilurus amazonicus, which is one of my favorites. And it's most likely a species complex because the ones from the Western Amazon look and act completely different from the ones from the Eastern Amazon. And the ones from the Western Amazon were the first ones that I worked with, and those they did really well, and they mated, but I couldn't get them to actually. They would always dump their eggs, and the eggs were never any good. And so I tried termite mounds. They didn't go for that. I tried, sand. I tried elevated nest boxes, soil, rotting vegetation, pre-dug holes, all types of stuff, and that none of that worked. And I was really exhausting my bag of tricks and getting frustrated. But I had tilapia living in their pond, and when I pulled out the tilapia, their behavior changed completely. Each female would like have her own territory that the other females, if they were to cross, they would have to be like 6 feet of water, 6 feet of where they would swim underwater if they were crossing another female's territory. And they would be like more like 3 feet on land would be like the zone that was protected. And they all started respecting each other's territory. And then, they started breeding and I started getting good eggs and babies. But when you think about it in hindsight, they live in a flood forest. And so, the presence of big fish, like, it either means two things. It's a waste. The water's not low enough to be worth it to breed, or it's a waste of resources if, there's a big, some bunch of big, what they probably think are ferocious cichlids in the pond, like Oscars. You're familiar with Oscars, right?
Yeah, I mean, South American cichlids and fish in general are pretty predatory.
Yeah,
and,
and aggressive. Oscar will bite your finger off. So maybe not, but I mean, they're there for.
They'll try.
Yeah, they'll try. But that type of stuff is interesting, and just being able to watch stuff. It's like you wouldn't think of like emerald boas, like you can see the intelligence on a king cobra because that's the type of intelligence that we relate to. But like the intelligence on an emerald tree boa is harder to decipher. But my emeralds would know. They would know what day they were getting fed. Long before Fridays was when I would feed them down there, and every Friday, even before, like long before I went down there with the bucket of rats, they would be posed in the middle of the day and everything at the time. So it's kind of like a patience type of intelligence. Patient intelligence is what they have. But it's like, as humans, the type of intelligence that we notice is like, for example, like a navigational type of intelligence. Like an animal learning where to, okay, you could say like, okay, such and such an animal is smart because it knows exactly, it knows to go into its shed every night, where it's heated.
Yes, sir.
But it's, like the Galapagos tortoises that I have here. I don't know if all of the species of Galapagos tortoises now migrate. Probably not, because I'm sure not all of the islands it's possible to migrate. But the species that I have, the microphenes from Isabel Island, they're known to, go high up into the mountains to feed and then come down to the coast. So, the intelligence that they have is like, it's a navigational intelligence. So it's easier to read as a human.
Well, and that's so interesting to think about that. And again, it's that experience you get from the field where when you're looking for something, you're thinking about it, going, what makes this animal move? What are the pins that need to be in this animal's little mental board to make it move from point A to point B? That there is so much.
And what are the triggers for it? I mean, it's like in Costa Rica, one thing that I thought was interesting always would be like, okay, you'd be out one night and then at maybe, let's say 8:30, you'd see 3 coral snakes within a half an hour. And then the next night, the temperature would be the same. The humidity would be the same. And then you see 3 coral snakes in within half an hour at 11 o'clock.
Yes.
And then the following night would be something else. But I mean, to our untrained eyes, it seems like everything is the same, but it's definitely not.
Yeah. Well, it's difficult to not anthropomorphize everything around us and what they do, right? And apply the way we think about what these animals are doing. Someone that maybe isn't necessarily into reptiles is something I experience very often with people because we're in the feeder business, and so we talk to a lot of the consumer. And the average person is applying mammalian hunger to the way they think about their reptiles. And it doesn't work that way at all. But
Right.
the average person applies that. So to think about that as just a basic baseline of doing that, that getting to be out in the field and understanding those inputs. And again, what an interesting back and forth that you have, right? Where you have an interest in the field, so you're going out, you're learning that, and then doing it in captivity, where you have a controlled environment where you can tweak, one point and then the next point and see your different changes over time. How valuable is that? The back and forth kind of knowledge that can be gained from that. I mean, how it fundamentally makes sense when explained, saying, okay, removing the fish and then maybe representing this to this animal. That makes perfect sense.
Right,
But,
but I removed the fish by accident. It wasn't. That's not what I was thinking.
well,
So
I would just claim that, hey, that made sense to me and that was the right thing to do, because that is the most badass story. But even that, here's the thing. Regardless, it's still badass that you recognized it after the fact.
oh yeah, but I
There's
mean, it's
so
like
much data in there.
it's like you find
that.
if you find a $1 million diamond by accident or find one when you're looking for it. What's the difference? Because you got it. And the result's the same.
Exactly. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Well, I think it's just being humble, and maybe that's what it is, and just being more cued in than you even recognize. We'll chalk it
Yeah,
up to
well,
that.
that's my style.
There you go. That's a good style too. Gets it done. How interesting. Well, good. And so, what ultimately, I don't know if what led you to Johnson City, if it's an appropriate
all right.
question.
No, of course it's appropriate. Well, actually, Costa Rica was getting really strict with the laws. It was getting really, really strict with the laws and hard to operate. I'm not going to get into detail about like what kind of silliness,
Yeah, no,
they,
sir. No need
they
to.
started smacking me with at the end, but it was maddening.
Yes, sir.
All right, so what I was saying was, there's a number of different in Texas by the county, so it's like there's some counties are stricter than others. There's some places that are as strict and as silly as California, and there's some places like where I am right now, like Blanco County, where you can do what you want. So Johnson City was perfect for me because it's not too close and it's not too far, so I don't have to deal with any city ordinances or any of that type of stuff. But it's not so remote that I can't make the business end of it work.
Yes, sir. Yeah. Interesting. And so, how much of an input? I mean, was it just automatically Texas when you thought about leaving Costa Rica, or did you look at the United States as a whole and you go, "This
I looked
works
at the United States
environmentally"?
as a whole. I mean, I would have chosen Florida, if it wasn't for the laws there, because I always felt at home in Florida because it's like, I'm from New York, so the Latin flavor and the Caribbean flavor, and all the ex-New Yorkers and all the animal people and the proximities to the Americas. I feel at home in Florida. I always felt at home there. But I had the hurricanes to worry about there. One and two, like the laws, because of all the the laws are getting very, very strict there, and I just want to work with reptiles and be left alone.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So Texas was the most logical choice. And besides, I've always, every time I've been to Texas before I moved here, I had a good time, and I already knew a number of people here, which helps.
Excellent. Yes, sir. Well, I'm glad you're here. It's a beautiful.
I'm glad to be here as well.
Yes, sir. It's a beautiful facility, and what an interesting person to chat to. And so, as we start to wind down here, being respectful of your time, and where do you see the hobby, the field now, and where do you see it going in the future?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, honestly, I see, and this is kind of sad too. It's just like I see people doing more morphs and stuff like that in the future, and novelties, and becoming more disconnected with the wild stuff as more and more countries close down. And so it's not like, a shipment of X fascinating snakes came in from Vietnam. Let me try to work with those, because that's not going to be an option.
Yes, sir.
So that's going to wind down. But I mean, I do see, um, people getting more serious in a lot of ways because, and I see hobbyists ending up getting more respect because it's like a lot of zoos, they have their hands tied with what they can do and what they can't do. And, so there's a lot of good work being done in the private sector. Um, so I see that being a good thing for the future, for and in the future. Hobbyists getting more incorporated into, conservation type of stuff and, working with zoos. And Yeah, it's also I've seen there's some I probably shouldn't talk about this, but I will. I just won't talk about what type of animals it is. I recently was in touch with like a group of people who have some pretty special animals. I mean, they're legal, but they're so that's not what it's about. But they're very select about who they let them go to. It's not something that just can be bought. There's some lizards, which I think is a good thing too, because it's like, I've always turned rubbed me wrong, like when somebody was just like, yeah, I'd like to get a Boland's python. It's like, what are you kidding me? Come on.
Mm.
That's
Yeah.
not a novelty. That's a special animal. You should have a group of them. If you're into it, that's great. I support you. But get a group and try to breed them. Try to learn something. Try to do something.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, that's not something that should be a novelty.
Yeah. Well, it's so interesting too, and again, there's so many niches to this hobby that makes it what it is, right? Where, I don't have much interest in the common species that are kept, but how many people does that bring in, right? And the echo of that, right?
Right, and
Where
everyone's got to start somewhere.
yes, yeah. And you think about, right, your facility where you are going to touch way more people than I ever will in my life, where the family coming through your facility and opening up their minds to what these animals are and getting to see them up close. That when they see the Atrox crawl by on their property, that they go, oh, okay, just let it keep moving, because they didn't understand there was people that appreciated something,
Right,
you know.
it's like any other living thing. It's scared and it wants to live.
Yes, yes. One thing that I think would be so valuable for people to see and understand is a growth rate chart of common species to understand the
That's a great
the
idea.
the fundamentals of how long it takes these animals to get to an age of maturity, right? And something that I think about when I'm out in the field and you see DOR animals is you go, oh my God, it's just a bit, right? A big, out in South Texas, you see this 6 foot Atrox and you're like, holy crap, man. I get right. There's different growth rates and stuff like that. It's a genetic thing, but still just what it took that animal to get
To
that
get there,
big.
yeah. No, I've
And
always thought that was upsetting too. I mean, I saw, the first time I went to Dominican Republic, I saw a rhino iguana, a big adult, being about to be eaten. That was, hanging from a spit and it had been skinned and everything. I just thinking, that lizard's probably 50 years old.
yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a little
But again,
upsetting.
people don't think about it, right? It's that
Right,
anthropomorphization that
right.
we
But
do
but yeah,
as
something
humans.
else about when you asked where the hobby's going. One trend that I see and that I like is that people look at I'm seeing people looking less at reptiles as something disposable. As something like, okay, we got to get these, we got to be serious with these, we got to breed them. They're not going to be around forever. It's
Yes,
like
sir.
a perfect example is like, you're familiar with that lizard, the African keeled lizard, the Gastropholus prasina?
Mm, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a green lizard that's it's a tree climber, and they're very hardy and they got a great personality. They're very perky.
Yes, sir.
But
Okay.
as about 15 years ago, that was a holy grail. They live at the top of trees, and the type of forest that they live in, I was told, is not something that that gets logged. So, you couldn't collect them by dealing with loggers, but it's like a few came in and they fell into the right hands. And, now it's a common lizard in captivity and you can see them and find them in Petco.
Yeah.
All because same thing with the crested geckos. I remember the first crested geckos that were collected. Those were what, $15,000 if I'm not wrong, was the pair for a pair.
I remember when we got our first crested geckos and at the shop I worked at as a kid and it being like, hey dude, these things, they just found these and we're getting them now. Look how cool this is.
Yeah.
We got to breed some of these. And it was just like, now if you look at the hobby where it is now and how oversaturated it is with those animals, that's insane from when I first saw them. The holy grail that they were
exactly.
When they were
it's like I remember
to me.
the place where I get my hair cut. The first time I ever walked in there, the barber was talking about crested geckos to a client, and I was just like, "This is funny." I would have never imagined this, 20 years ago.
Yes. Well, I mean, how interesting is that when you think about a bearded dragon? I described not too long ago as the Budweiser of reptiles.
Yeah,
I
got a bearded dragon story. There was this was somebody, I don't know why I left this out when we were talking about inspirations or mentors. But there was this old German guy, who lived in New Jersey, who I met when I was younger, who I was friends with. And he was like, he would do all this really clever stuff. Like he'd have cages on wheels that he could wheel out the window and back in the window. And he had, everything was like with waterfalls and all planted. And he had, what did he do? He had he'd make like a tiny little miniature greenhouses. In his basement, like how you see the basement windows that are up in the corner.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
He would dig those out and he'd make like a kind of a mini greenhouse around that with cellophane, which let a lot of the UV in. Huh. And that was the first time I ever saw a bearded dragon, was at his place, and this was in the 80s. And he's like, "Watch, this is going to be the pet item of the future." And he was right.
Wow. But to also think about that, just the knowledge that was gained being in where I think, right, if we look at the future of humanity and like a dystopian future, it is more of a big city, people living in compact areas, and the information that was gained through that then when you were able to stretch your wings and expand into these different areas and had spaces that, some of the cages you're building now are the size of someone's apartment.
Yeah,
right.
The size of my apartment.
Yeah, right. And just how cool that is to see that growth in your own knowledge, right? Through seeking it and being interested in it, to see where it comes into when you can be you can do whatever you want. How cool is that? And those animals benefit from that and the public benefits from that.
Yeah, it's like, I always like to say, I like to let the animals be what they should be. Because it's like for example, the croc monitors, the leading cause of death for those in captivity is coronary failure.
Okay.
Because they don't, people feed them too much and they don't get enough exercise. But I mean, the design of that cage came from knowledge of like how they live in the wild. I mean, I never did field work with them, but a friend of mine, whose name is Sam Sweet, did field work with them, and he said basically, the way a croc monitor, their biology is he suspects, and I completely agree with this, that they have a tremendous home range, right? And they eat mostly birds and flying foxes. And they know where all the fruiting trees are, so they'll go to a certain fruiting tree and they'll wait for like a pigeon or flying foxes to come and feed there, and then they'll catch one, and then the flying foxes or the pigeons will get spooked, and then they'll move to another tree. So, that tree is hot, for lack of a better word. So then they have to walk walk a couple of miles to another tree in their home range. So they get lots of exercise.
Yeah. Well, that's something so interesting to think about when you think about captivity and modern keeping, where these animals don't get disturbed, right? There's nothing where they're most of them are never going to run from something, in fear of their lives. And in the probably the value of that, right? Where it's probably good for this animal to raise its heart rate every once in a while and
Absolutely.
take off. And you can't experience that. You're not going to do that. Like, what am I going to do? Walk in my snake cage and smack my snake around a couple times and then walk
Right.
out? I'm not going to do that. But the value and longevity that leads to an animal that, if in captivity, was experiencing that. When you look at obesity in the average snake, I don't think people do not, as I don't think they do not understand that their snake, if we're talking about a colubrid, should look kind of like a tire. Should
Right.
have there should have some definition to its
Right.
back.
It should be lean and mean.
Yes, and people just don't think about that. It's a conversation I had today with someone talking about their reticulated python, and what they were doing dietary for it, and I was like, man, you don't need to do that. Do it this way. Just don't worry about it. Don't feed it, and try to
Right.
get it. And like, well, I can't not feed it. She gets
Right. But
hungry,
I
and I
mean,
go, just
it's
don't
like,
feed it. It's okay.
I mean, I feed stuff seasonally. I go light on the food. I go heavy on the food in the spring and the fall, and winter. Winter, if I feed at all. I mean, the lizards obviously eat year round, but the snakes get slowed down over the winter time. And in the heat of the summer too, I slow it down a bit as well, because I think that's the most natural way to do things.
Yes or no? That makes sense. That makes sense to do it that way, and how interesting, right? Where, I mean, I think that maybe I asked this question, and I think the removing of the fish almost kind of answers it, but maybe there's another one. Have there been any situations where you were in where you changed something, or where you saw it and you were like, or a question you had that finally got answered
Oh yeah,
after
yeah.
many years?
Another one that comes to mind is like, there's people, I like turtles as well. I keep a number of turtle species. And
Is
there's
it?
several species that people swear you can't keep together. They go, no, they kill each other. They kill each other. But it's like, how's the species going to survive if they kill each other every time they see each other? That's the reason they're doing that, is because we're doing something wrong in the husbandry. And one such turtle is the Sulawesi forest turtles. It's kind of like a North American wood turtle with a yellow head. You're familiar with them?
Yes, sir. Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Yeah, so those people swear you can't keep those together. But something that came, this is also by accident. We keep those with some sailfin dragons.
Yes, sir.
And they, so it's like the cage has got a lot of vertical space and, climbing areas. And the turtles climb like you wouldn't believe. You see them several feet off the ground on branches, just like lizards and stuff, which is fascinating. And we have, it's not a huge cage either. I'd say it's 10 by, it's like
It's a pretty
10
big
by,
cage.
yeah, it's pretty big. You've seen it. Okay, yeah. It's big, but I mean,
Yes,
it's
sir.
not.
Why I'm familiar with that species is because I've seen it at your facility, but I
Oh,
wouldn't
okay.
have been
Yes, you know what
otherwise.
I'm
Yes,
talking
sir.
about now. But the order, the interesting surprise there is that, those, they'll fight a little bit. They'll snap at each other, but, nobody has any bite marks on them. Nobody's stressed. Nobody's not eating. There's none of that going on. But, because of the fact that, we give them vertical space, they can establish dominance and order. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah,
like they have
yeah.
their,
Yeah, in a
and
way
for
that
this,
you wouldn't normally be able to do. Where, of course, if you're
right,
keeping them in a two-dimensional way,
right.
they can't get away, right? That's something so commonly that we don't think about. Where we think, okay, if this thing's attacking us, I'm just going to kill it and make it stop or move away from it. But when you can't, that's just not how these animals think.
Right, but
And
if there's
so,
an order, if everyone's got their own, if that's an important part of their social order, like if later the dominant one can climb the highest, or they're not in each other's faces all the time.
yes. Yeah, it's almost thinking about reptile keeping in a more of a fish tank keeping style, right? Where
Right. I'd
there's
like to.
vertical space to be used there.
Right, because I mean the stress. Like an example is like you've seen the emerald setup we have, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I mean that's very very high. And there is no stress. I mean, I do everything with them that you're not supposed to do. I feed them big food. I feed them frequently. It gets hot. It gets cold, and there's never any problems.
Yes,
I mean,
sir.
I should actually be walking into a pile of babies any day now. But it's just like there's no stress because of the height.
Yes. Well, and you think about that, and you think about the large prey item where you hear a lot of people talking about, oh, you have to feed, and this isn't a species that I keep, but my one of my close friends is a avid emerald keeper, and so we've had endless conversations about emeralds and kind of keeping them and how to do it. So I'm a jackass talking from my buddy's perspective and our conversations back and forth. But not it seems like those animals that are not eating large prey items, there's another issue going on there. And that if the animal's healthy, it should be able to take a large meal.
Right,
I think the problems that you're running into is an animal that is unhealthy that cannot process a larger meal, but it should be able to.
right, and it's stress is everything.
Yes.
And it's like I know this is not something that I would do, but I respect the logic. I know somebody in Florida, who swears that the best way to deal with green mambas is to pick them up with two hooks and lift them high above your head. He swears that they turn to jelly.
No.
I mean, that's not something I would do because I could
I mean,
picture myself like sliding down and getting bit on the lips or whatever. but but I
that's
mean,
great till it doesn't work. That
yeah, but
might be the answer.
yeah,
But
it makes sense.
yes, yes. Well, too, but then also, I mean, think about again just those factors that what a unique position that you are in, where maybe sometimes your animals do get that experience of being like, "Holy shit, that thing's trying to eat me!" When the 5-year old or 6-year old kid runs up to the glass and starts banging on it, and the croc monitor goes, "What the hell?" And
Right,
shoots up for whatever reason, right? Normally it
right.
wouldn't,
I
but
mean, but
today that little
that's
kid freaked it out, and that organicness of that.
yeah. It's a common mis misconcept that everything is okay for wild animals. I remember hearing about a study with orangutans. It's something like some ridiculously high percentage of orangutans in the wild, have broken bones from falling and busting their asses.
Yeah.
It happens. Not everything goes
Yes.
smoothly.
Yes. Well, excellent. Well, you know what? I could talk to you for hours on end and keep picking your mind and throw
Yeah,
different
I'm
ideas
enjoying it.
back and forth. But we'll be cognizant of your time tonight and hope we get to do this in the future again.
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely.
when I'm
Let's definitely keep in touch. And you said you
Let me zoom out on you here. Okay, you got a message for the time capsule?
Yeah, and it's simply this. My prediction for you is that even though you'll forget all about this in some way consciously, next summer at about this time, you'll remember to return.